Oh yeah, I mean that part. I know how that part works, but
Let me show you. It's gonna just give me a second.
okay.
Let's say that I want the exam, just to pick one. This is the exam that I want. You will notice that the page is a lot nicer than this older one. That is because the exam is newer. Well, once that you're here, the actual page is gonna give you recommendations to prepare. The free resources are pretty good. They're pretty complete. They're on video. I recommend it. They're pretty good. For the other exams, that's gonna be tricky, and that's unfortunately the case for MCSD. But I know that there are some resources. For one of the exams, I have find the complete instruction video on YouTube available from the Microsoft page. So I know that if you're trying to find it, trying to search it, you will find it. There are a lot of resources going on in the web. And if you're not able to find it, there's always books. Well, going back to the schedule. Once that you selected your exam and you're on a schedule, you need to do two things before one thing before that exam. You need to, Microsoft recommend to run a pre-check registration. So basically that you need to ensure that you are actually able to take the exam at home, and you need to validate, pretty much your computer. Basically that the webcam is working, also the microphone and the internet connection. When you schedule the exam, it's gonna give you that link. I will recommend it in that moment. If you don't, there's no worries. You can do it I usually do it 30 minutes or 45 minutes before my exam. Once it's the day of the exam, the email is gonna give you a link to follow. Basically, you click there. It's gonna take you here, where you go to, your dashboard. This is the dashboard. It's gonna tell you that you have an appointment. You click and start previously scheduled online practical exam. Once that you're there, it's gonna, you'll need to follow a couple of steps. But basically, it's gonna walk with you around those steps. Those are fairly easy to do. Basically, you will need a cell phone. It's not letting me because it's not that I did. I just want to give you a couple of recommendations. Basically, you will need your phone around for the first part. They're gonna ask you to disconnect your second monitor in case you have one. Okay. This is the exam that I have. And not that, let me find it. Person view. No, I don't think. Okay, here you go. This is my exam. This is the appointment. I can run the system test. I click right here. It's gonna give me an access code. I can copy it, and then I should run application tenants. Right there. Basically, what the application is gonna do is gonna ask me to take several pictures of the station while I'm gonna take the exam. So they're gonna ask you for 4 pictures of the actual place, your desk, just to confirm that everything is okay. They're looking for just to make sure that you're not trying to cheat. At one point in one exam, they actually asked me that if there are any issues, they're gonna let you know. In one case, they asked me to confirm that the second monitor is disconnected. And in my case, I have several books just in my arm's reach. So they asked me to remove those books. Also, they asked me to confirm that the keyboard that I have on my desk is the one that I'm gonna be using. And that's pretty much it. Just another thing, you should, once that you take the pictures, and you will need, another picture of an ID. I usually use my passport because it's international and it's pretty safe to use, I think. And it's also going to ask you to take a picture of yourself. So just you are the person who actually represents the exam. After you take all the pictures, you will not need your phone anymore. Actually, after it's a wizard. So after the wizard ended, it's gonna ask you to refresh the page, now that you had the pictures. And after that moment, you will not need your phone anymore. I would recommend just to turn it off and put it everywhere and put it somewhere else. After that, the webcam is gonna be turned on, also your microphone, and they may keep you waiting for a minute or two, and then the exam should automatically start. And that's it. You just take the exam. It's gonna take you to a survey just to understand why you're taking the exam, then the actual exam, and finally another survey just to see how your experience was. And that's it. That's, as I say, quite simple. Any questions?
No.
Hi, Carlos. Javier here. How do you get to the resource materials? Is there a...
There are two ways. If it's a fairly new exam, it's going to be there on the actual exam page. This is the same example. So let's say that I find this certification. This is the exam for this certification. And on the same page, you have the resource materials, which are free. If it's an honor exam, that will be trickier. You will need to Google it. But I'm fairly confident that you should be able to find it. At least for the case of MCSD, you should be able to find most of the material online. But you will have to Google it.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. So yeah, that will be it. Thank you for your time.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Carlos. Okay, we can go ahead and start with the virtual learn now. I'm going to make you the host, Rodolfo. There you go.
Okay, let me just hit record.
I think it's already recording.
Oh, okay.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, I want to talk about my experience migrating from ASP, from .NET Core 2.1 to 3.1. You may wonder why someone would want to upgrade .NET. I mean, it's not very common, especially since it doesn't add a lot of value, at least not value for the end user that is using the application. Everyone can hear me, right?
I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So why did we, well, this was for global resale. Why this didn't reach production, but going back to the closing that parenthesis, why did we have to upgrade to .NET Core 3.1? Well, there was a bug. If you remember, in my last virtual learning presentation, I talked at the very end, I said that the next thing that I wanted to do was run tests using Selenium with Docker in Azure DevOps. So basically UI tests were programmatically, we open a web browser, and also programmatically, we click a button, fill out a text field, submit a form, and then we verify that the result is what we expect. So I started working on that, and there was a problem with .NET Core 2.1. It had to do with authentication. Basically, when we use a provider like Azure Active Directory, when .NET Core is running inside Docker, 2.1 specifically, it doesn't use SSL when redirecting back to the site. It uses HTTP, and that was not working for me because it had to be HTTPS. So that was the reason. It was a technical reason to migrate the project, the solution. Now, .NET Core 2.2 was not an option. And let me switch to the next slide. This table shows the different .NET Core versions. So for example, you'll notice that .NET Core 2.2 has a support level of end of life, which means that it's not supported anymore, meaning that it doesn't get hotfixes, patches. It ended its support last year. Now, that's why I switched to 3.1, which is still LTS. I think that's long-term support, which is not really that long. It's 2 years. So that was the reason to upgrade not to .NET Core 2.2, but 3.1. Now let me go back. Okay, and it can be difficult, especially if you have a lot of libraries being used, because you need to upgrade the libraries as well. We didn't have that many. Maybe, I don't know, like a ballpark would be 20, I don't know, 25, something like that. In our case, it was a 3-day effort. And it made me realize that during the process, I realized that some of the changes were like just renaming classes or methods. So that made it easier. But at the same time, like I wonder, like, why would Microsoft make us just change the name of a namespace or a method when they could just leave the same name and do everything like on the background and make the changes on their side. But anyway, sorry about that little run. But yeah, most of the changes were just changing the namespace. Now there's a guide to upgrade. For example, actually there are guides because you can upgrade from .NET 2.1 to 2.2. You can upgrade from 2.1 to 3.0, or you can upgrade from 3.0 to 3.1. However, there's no guide to upgrade from or migrate from 2.1 to 3.1. But that doesn't stop me from upgrade to 2.1 to 3.1 because we just follow the steps from 2.1 to 2.2 and then, I'm sorry, from 2.1 to 3.0 and then just minor changes to 3.1. So it's not really difficult. The fact that there's no guide it's not a big deal. Now, what's required to migrate? By the way, if there are any questions, feel free to interrupt. So what are the steps? First, you need to have Visual Studio 2019, .NET Core 3.1, and then you need to upgrade your projects to .NET Core 3.1. This is a very simple change which I'll show in a second. Then you update all your NuGet packages to a version that is compatible with .NET Core 3.1. Now, this step was really easy for us because since we were upgrading to the last version, that means that we can use the last version of the packages, right? If we were, let me go back to the previous slide. If we were upgrading, for example, to .NET Core 2.2, that would have been more difficult because we wouldn't be able most likely we wouldn't be able to use the latest version of, I don't know, Newtonsoft or Kendo UI, because that latest version is should be compatible with 3.1, but not with 2.2. However, as I mentioned, the fact that we were upgrading to 3.1 made it really easy. We just picked the latest version of the NuGet packages, and that was it. Unless, of course, there was no version for 3.1, because that happens. Sometimes developers, especially if it's open source, just stop working on their projects and we need to find something else. And the final step is just follow the Microsoft migration guide. It's really thorough and it's really detailed. So that's basically it. And after that, you need to, well, obviously, fix compilation errors that arise, and then compile and fix the runtime errors. And I had to do those last 2 steps like 20 times, because I run the code, I got an error, I fix it. Then I run the code, I got an error, I fix it. Then and so on. And as I mentioned, it was 3 days, so I don't consider that a long time. I think it's a fair amount of time to upgrade a project. Now, what should you know? This is the URL for the guide from 2.2 to 3.0, and from there you can find the other migration guides. What else? Newtonsoft, right? Everyone uses Newtonsoft. That's a JSON library written by James Newton, I think that's his name. Now, that's actually now a part of .NET. It's in system.text.json. Now, since it's the first release of this library, system.text.json, that means there's going to be bugs. That it's not going to be, well, there might be bugs. But for sure, there are going to be some things or functions that are missing. So if you want, you can stick to Newtonsoft for now and still use .NET Core 3.1. But if you're starting a project from scratch, you can probably just use system.text.json instead of Newtonsoft.json. Okay, now the next thing that we are going to review are the specific steps. For example, let me go back. We're going to review how to upgrade the projects to .NET Core 3, how to update the NuGet packages, and we're going to review some problems that I came across and how I fixed them. It's like 15 to 20 slides, so it's going to take a long time. Okay, so the first step, is to upgrade the projects to 3.1, and that's really simple. I mean, you just have to change one line. And if I show you in Visual Studio, which is here, okay, this is Visual Studio. So you just double click the project, and you just type 2.1 there, and that's it. Well, that's what I do. And that's the first step. The next step is related to the NuGet packages. You need to update them, but at the same time, you need to remove some obsolete packages. For example, Microsoft.ASP NET Core.razor.design does not exist anymore. And there's a list of packages in the migration guide that you need to remove. And this is the easy part so far. But at the same time, there are packages that you need to upgrade. Sorry, I don't see the slide. Okay, this is the one. It's in the wrong order, but okay. At the same time, there are packages that you need to upgrade. Like, for example, here, what would be a good example? For example, Visual Studio.web.codegeneration.design is in version 2.1, and usually you just need to upgrade to 3.1.x. That's usually the, how can I say this? The fact that the version is 2.1 tells you that it's something that you need to upgrade to 3.1 because the framework is 2.1. And usually the version of the nuggets, especially those from Microsoft, match the version of the framework. So you can see here that when we update it to 3.1, I have to use the version 3.1 for this library. And what I'm showing here is a difference between, from Bitbucket, between the old version, which is in red, the old code, which is .NET Core 2.1, and the new code, which is green, and that's the .NET Core 3.1. Now let me go back to the previous slide because that's the next topic, which is actually follow the migration guide. The migration guide is going to tell you to update your program CS, your startup CS, and that's pretty much it. You might need to update, migrate some instructions like URL helpers, which we have to do, and a lot of namespaces, but it's mostly the program CS and the startup CS files that need to be migrated. Okay, so let's review program CS. Here, you can see, well, this is just the name of the method, so we can ignore the first part, the first screenshot. So let's focus on the one at the bottom. Here, as you can see, in our project, which was 2.1, we used iWeb Host Builder, but for 3.1, I'm not going to say you need to use, I'm going to say you should use iHost Builder. You can still use iWeb Host Builder, but I mean, then what's the point in upgrading to 3.1? And there are some reasons why you might still want to use iWeb Host Builder. And those reasons are related to the NuGet packages. I mean, if your NuGet packages, if some of them rely on iWeb Host Builder, then you're in trouble. So that's the first one. You need to change to iHost Builder. And the reason, I investigated that, and the reason seems to be better performance. iHost Builder has better performance than iWeb Host Builder. And you can see that you need to call now configure web host defaults. And inside of that, you do use startup and use application insights, instead of doing it directly from after create default builder. So that's still easy, right? Let's go to the startup. And this is still easy, but things might get tricky. For example, you need to now add useRouting, services.useRouting. Now, if you use the function use static files, you must place it before useRouting. There's no longer use MVC or use SignalR. That doesn't exist in .NET Core 3.1. Now it's use endpoints. And finally, iHosting environment has been replaced with iHost environment. And like this last one are the things that I consider useless or really that don't add value. But I'm pretty sure Microsoft does this for a reason. But still, I mean, like for example, take Apache. I mean, they don't usually rename stuff when you migrate from one version to another. So, but anyway, I think that's something that Microsoft can improve. Besides the fact that they change frameworks really often, right? But again, that's for a good reason, like Docker, or that the fact that they want to use Linux. That explains why. I'm sure that explains why there are a lot of framework changes. Okay, so moving on to the startup. So in this case, I remove the RMVC because now you call add controllers with views. And as you can see, nothing changed inside. It's just a different method name. And if you call set compatibility version, you can still do that, but you need to do that inside add tracer pages, which is also new. I believe that one is new in .NET Core 3.1. Now, here is an important part, which I mentioned earlier. You can still use Newtonsoft, and in my case, well, in the case of .NET Core 3.1, this is how you do it. You just do add Newtonsoft instead of add JSON options, and everything inside is pretty much the same. And after that, you need to do add authorization. Now, okay, continuing with the startup CS file. As I mentioned before, you need to use drawing, that's new. And I also mentioned that there's no use MVC, which is removed here, and there's no use signal R, which is here. Now you do use endpoints, which is right here, and it's pretty much the same format as use MVC, it's just a different method name. And inside you pass the roots. But instead of using map root, you call map controller root with the same parameters. I just removed the, what is it, name parameters? I removed the first line, but it's the same arguments. And well, at the end, there's no more use signal R. You just put the signal R root that indicates where the hub is inside use endpoints. So that's good. I mean, in the past we used to have use MVC and use signal R, but now it's what's the word? Centralized in one place. Now, this is the tricky part. At least this was the tricky, this next slide was the tricky part for us. We use service locator in our project. Now, that causes problems in .NET Core 3.1 from what I read. First, what is service locator? I'm pretty sure everyone knows, but as you know, inversion of control means taking responsibility from someone. So you can do it two ways. You can do it with dependency injection. You can do it with a service locator. Dependency injection is when you inject the dependency. And service locator is when you programmatically retrieve it from somewhere. In this case, it's called the service locator. So we do this a lot in our project. Service locator, but, well, not a lot. I mean, that's not objective. We maybe do it like 20, 30 times in our project. We do service locator .current .get instance, and then you specify which interface you want to retrieve, and it retrieves the implementation for that interface. And this is a problem because in .NET Core 3.1, because from what I read, if you use the service locator in 3.1, it creates a copy of the what you pass to the service locator. So when you inject it, for example, the IURL helper factory, that's one copy. But when you call the service locator with that parameter, that means that there's another copy of the IURL helper factory somewhere, and that means that if you use the service locator to retrieve the database instance, anything you need, that means that you have a copy of you have two copies. So we try to move away from the service locator for the most part, but some other times it was still used, and that was okay because those were it was okay to have some duplicated classes like the IURL helper factory, which doesn't add a lot of what is it called, like memory. to the application. But having two instances of your database connection, that's something else. And we try to move away from the service locator by using a view component. What does this mean? That, one more thing so that you can have context. Most of the usages of the service locator, or the critical ones, I should say, were inside partial view. So instead of using the service locator there in the CSHTML, we created a view component in which you can invoke from Razor, and you can inject here whatever you need. And that way you don't need to use the service locator anymore. You can inject here an iRepository or an iSession. And then you can do all your logic below. Now, this was a big one. And I'm talking about, it was not difficult, but it required time. There's no structure map, doesn't exist for .NET Core 3.1. In fact, structure map is deprecated. It's no longer being developed. So I first wanted to use Autofac, which is what I have used the most before this project. But it required a lot of changes, and I didn't want to spend too much time on that. So what did I do? I noticed that the guy who created structure map, Jeremy Miller, also created Lamar. Lamar is probably a more efficient implementation of the structure map, and it's driven specifically, well, not specifically, but there's a version of Lamar for .NET Core 3.1. And at first I started using structure map. Actually, yeah, I used, let me go back a little in the presentation. I started using structure map with .NET Core 3.1, which is possible. However, I had to use an iWeb host builder. That's a requirement. If you want to use a structure map in .NET Core 3.1, you can. However, you need to use an iWeb host builder. And I started doing that, and but then I thought, like, why am I upgrading to .NET Core 3.1 if I'm not fully using its capabilities? And that's when I decided to use Lamar. And the switch, what I found out was that the switch from structure map to Lamar is really straightforward. There's really no effort required there, which was good. One of the things that you need to change is basically two things. Is the configure container, well, no, it's three things. This is your program CS file. If you want to use Lamar, you need to specify that you want to use Lamar using this first instruction. And then in your startup, which is the second screenshot at the bottom, in your startup.cs, you need to call configure container instead of configure services. And then you need to pass a service registry instead of a nice service collection. But in this case, a service registry is still a nice service collection. So, but you need to pass this second class, which is part of Lamar, for it to work. And finally, you can get rid of your configure inversion of control method. But and I have this in two different slides, so I'll switch back and forth. In the past, we used to do var container equals new container, then container configure, then configure.scan, and then you scan the calling assembly and so on. But now, what you do is simpler. You just do services.scan. And you can forget about the create the container and configure the container. You just go services.scan and then you pass the same instructions. It's more compact and that's good. And in the end, towards the bottom, you can see that we create some background behaviors from not AutoMapper, the other one. What is it called? Mediator, yeah. So mediator code, some mediator configuration using structure map. But you can do that here, the same. Directly in services. I hope I said that right. Now, this last part was difficult because I couldn't find the answer right away. And these last slides are part of running the code. Everything was compiling by now. Just doing a quick recap. We removed, we upgraded the projects 3.1. We removed obsolete packages. We updated program CS. We updated the nugex to the very latest version. We updated the startup.cs file. We removed service locator invocations, most of them, or the ones that call the database. And we migrated from structure map to Lamar. And after that, the code was compiling, however, it was not run. And this was the part that took the most time, probably. And some of the errors came from startup.cs. So once you update or migrate your startup.cs file, you notice that some things might not work and you may need to change some things around, move instructions to a different place. Now, going back to this slide, we call URL helper to create links from controllers and actions. So you pass it like index controller. I'm sorry. Oh, I said that in Spanish. My brain crashed. Sorry. So you can call the home controller and the index action. And from using the URL helper, you can create a string with a link. And that was throwing, I think it was a null reference exception inside the method implementation. And the solution was actually simple. But it took me a while to find it out. You just need to get an instance of the IURL helper factory. And you use that to call, to retrieve the URL helper. And then you just call the method display link instead of creating a new instance, which is what we were doing in .NET Core 2.1, creating a new instance of the URL helper. That causes an exception. And finally, you need to update your test projects, sorry. That was also an easy part. It took me like just 2 hours to do that. You do need to add a couple of lines. Well, as you know, the test projects, if you're doing test projects, you also need like the equivalent of a startup.cs where you set up everything. And we had to add these instructions for Lamar, which are documented in the Lamar website. And well, after that, well, you do the same thing. You update the test project to .NET Core 3.1, you update the nuggets and so on. And here, just as an example, I want to show that you, well, our test projects also use instruction map. So you also update that as well here. Now, just to close this talk, I want to show you the migration guide so you can have an idea of how useful it is. Let me open it up. Okay, this is it. This is the migration guide from 2.2 to 3.0, and there are other migration guides here. There's even one for 3.1 to 5.0, which is the upcoming version of .NET. I believe that's going to be released on November this year, 5.0. Oh yeah, this guide, going back to the main topic, this guide shows you the prerequisites, which I mentioned, 2019 Visual Studio and .NET Core 3.0. It tells you to do some updates to the global.json, update the parent file, which I also mentioned, remove solid packages, so on. There are some breaking changes as well that are mentioned at the bottom of the guide. It talks about Newtonsoft, Signaler here at the right, Host Builder replacing Web Host Builder, the breaking API changes. So this should be, and this was my initial resource for all the changes. And it's really thorough, like I mentioned. Going back to the presentation. My conclusion at the end was that you should only migrate if it's necessary. Otherwise, it's a good idea to stick to the version that you're using, because if you're using a large number of NuGet packages, it's going to be a headache. But in our case, it was necessary. So I didn't really have another option if I wanted to do what I wanted, which was running Selenium tests with Docker in Azure DevOps. And this is it. That's it. Are there any questions? If not, I'll pass it on to Paulina. Paulina, anything you want to add?
Okay. No, thank you, Rodolfo, for this virtual learn, and thank you everyone for joining. This will be updated into our Confluence page. I'm going to send you the link through Slack in a moment. And just as a reminder, we're going to have another virtual learn next Wednesday. It will be by Jesus Flores. It won't be technical. It will be actually very fun virtual learn. It's called All You Ever Wanted to Know About Beer, but you were too busy drinking to ask. So I'm going to send the invite today just to remind you. And yes, I think that will be it. Thank you to Rodolfo for this and everyone for joining.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Rodolfo.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Rodolfo.
Thank you, Rodolfo.
Thank you, Rodolfo.
Thanks, Rodolfo.
Have a good day and
They
Good day. Bye-bye.